She woke up before the alarm, as she often did, lying still for a few seconds and listening to the quiet of her small apartment. The ceiling above her had a faint crack that ran from one corner to the other. Something she had noticed on the first day she moved in. She had thought then that she would only stay for a year, maybe 2, until things improved. 5 years later, the crack was still there. And so was she. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake her aching back too quickly. The room was cold, and she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders before swinging her legs off the bed. The floor felt icy under her feet. She reached for her slippers, worn thin at the heels, and slipped them on. Her mornings followed the same pattern every day. She made her bed neatly, not because anyone would see it, but because it gave her a small sense of order. Then she walked to the tiny kitchen, switched on the light, and stood for a moment looking at what she had. A half loaf of bread, a small carton of eggs, a jar of instant coffee, and a few packets of soup lined the shelf. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She boiled water, poured it over the coffee, and stirred slowly. While it cooled, she packed her lunch. She wrapped 2 slices of bread around a piece of leftover chicken from the night before. She added an apple, slightly bruised on one side, and a small bottle of water. She hesitated for a moment, then added an extra slice of bread and a small container of soup she had saved. She didn't know why she did it. She just felt like she should. After getting dressed in her simple work clothes, she checked the mirror. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were kind. She tied her hair back neatly and took a deep breath. Another day, she told herself. Just get through another day outside. The city was already waking up. Cars passed by in a steady stream, and the smell of exhaust mixed with the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. She walked to the bus stop with her bag slung over her shoulder, her steps quick but unhurried. She had learned long ago not to rush life. It only made things harder. The bus ride was crowded as usual. She stood holding onto a pole, swaying slightly as the bus moved through traffic. She watched people around her. Some stared at their phones. Some looked out the window. A few looked lost in thought. Everyone seemed busy, wrapped up in their own worlds. When she got off the bus, she walked the last few blocks to her workplace. The building was tall and gray, with clean glass doors and a polished floor inside. It looked important, serious, like nothing out of place could be allowed to exist there, and just outside those doors, as always, sat the homeless man. He sat in the same spot every morning, leaning against the wall near the entrance but far enough away not to block anyone. He had a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders, no matter the weather. His clothes were worn and faded but clean. His beard was gray and uneven, and his hands were rough and red from the cold. Most people didn't look at him. Some pretended he wasn't there. A few glanced at him quickly, then looked away. Occasionally, someone dropped a coin into the small cup he kept by his side. But that was rare. She noticed him because she always noticed things like that. The first time she saw him, months ago, she had almost walked past like everyone else. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he nodded politely at people as they passed, even when they ignored him. Maybe it was the quiet way he existed, not asking for anything, not causing trouble. From that day on, she couldn't help but see him every morning. She noticed how he always tried to keep his space tidy. She noticed how he pulled his blanket tighter when it was cold, and how he smiled faintly when someone acknowledged him. Sometimes she wanted to talk to him. Sometimes she wanted to give him something, but she was careful. Her job mattered. She couldn't afford to risk it. Still, there were days when she brought an extra piece of fruit or a bottle of water and left it near him as she walked by. She never stopped for long. She never made a show of it. She just nodded, and he nodded back. Their exchanges were silent, but they meant something. Inside the building, her day was busy. Phones rang, emails came in, meetings filled her schedule. She worked hard, as she always did. She stayed focused, finished her tasks on time, and helped others when she could. She wasn't the loudest or the most noticed, but she was reliable. During her lunch break, she sat at her desk and ate quietly. Sometimes she'll listen to coworkers talk about their plans, their vacations, their families. She smiled when appropriate, nodded when spoken to, but mostly kept to herself. That afternoon, she glanced at her bag and remembered the extra food she had packed. She thought of the man outside. She told herself she would decide later. The day dragged on, and by the time she clocked out, she was tired. Her feet ached, and her shoulders felt heavy. She walked toward the exit, her thoughts already drifting to dinner and rest as she stepped outside. The air felt colder than it had that morning. The sky was darker. The light wind blew through the street. The homeless man was still there. He looked more tired now, his shoulders slumped, his hands tucked under his blanket. She slowed her steps. People passed by her, heading home. Their faces set in the same tired expressions she felt. She hesitated. She thought about her job. She thought about the rules, spoken and unspoken. She thought about how easily things could go wrong. Then she thought about the extra food in her bag. Without making a decision, she found herself stopping a few feet away from him. She crouched down slightly and placed the wrapped sandwich in the small container of soup beside him. "Here," she said softly. "In case you're hungry." Her voice was gentle, almost unsure. He looked up, surprised. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then his eyes softened. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was calm, steady. "That's very kind." She nodded, stood up quickly, and walked away before she could overthink it. Her heart was pounding. There was also a strange warmth in her chest. As she walked to the bus stop, she told herself it was nothing, just food. Just a small thing, but small things have a way of staying with you. That night, she lay in bed. She thought about his face when she handed him the food. She thought about how simple it had been, how natural it felt. She didn't know that this moment, so small and quiet, was the beginning of everything changing. She fell asleep not knowing that someone had seen her stop, not knowing that a simple act of kindness would soon be judged, questioned, and punished. She only knew that for one moment that day. She had done what felt right, and sometimes that is enough. The next morning, she woke up the same way, before the alarm, unaware that the routine she depended on was already starting to crack, just like the line in her ceiling. She moved through her morning as usual, made her coffee, packed her lunch, and once again added a little extra without thinking too hard about it. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet choices being made within it. She stepped onto the bus, holding her bag close, her expression calm. Another day, she told herself. She had no idea how different this day would become. The next morning did not feel different when she opened her eyes, but something sat heavy in her chest, like a quiet warning she could not explain. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling crack, following its line as if it might tell her something. It never did. It never had. She pushed herself up and started the day the way she always did, because routine was the only thing that made life feel steady. She dressed carefully, choosing the same neat clothes she wore most days. Nothing bright, nothing that drew attention. She packed her bag, again adding an extra portion of food without fully thinking about it. It had already become a habit, and habits felt safe. The bus ride was quieter than usual. She stood near the back, holding onto the pole, watching her reflection in the dark window. She looked normal, ordinary. No sign that her life was about to shift. When she reached the building, she slowed slightly. The homeless man was there, sitting in his usual place. He gave a small nod when he saw her. She returned it. That was all. She did not stop. She told herself she would speak to him later after work when no one was around. Inside, the air felt tense. She noticed it right away. Voices were lower. People avoided eye contact. Someone stopped talking the moment she walked past. She told herself she was imagining things. She sat at her desk and logged in. Her screen flickered to life. Emails loaded slowly. Her hands moved on their own, replying, organizing, checking schedules. Work was familiar. Work made sense. About an hour into the day, she received a message asking her to come to a small meeting room. No explanation. Just a time. Now her stomach tightened. She stood, smoothed her clothes, and walked down the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last. She tried to think of reasons she might be called in. Had she missed something? Made a mistake? She could not think of anything serious. The meeting room door was open. Inside sat her supervisor and someone from management. Their expressions were neutral, carefully controlled. She was asked to sit. The door closed behind her. They began by thanking her for her work. They spoke about professionalism, company values, public image. The words flowed smoothly, rehearsed. She listened, confused, waiting for the point. Then they mentioned the incident outside the building. Her heart dropped. They described her giving food to a homeless man. They said it created concern. They said it could attract attention, cause issues, raise safety questions. They said it was inappropriate. She tried to explain. She said it was just food, that she meant no harm, that she had done it quietly, respectfully, that she was only trying to help. They listened without really listening. Rules were rules, they said. Boundaries mattered. Image mattered. She was informed she was being let go, effective immediately. The words did not make sense at first. They hung in the air, heavy and unreal. She felt like she was watching someone else sit there, nodding slowly, unable to speak. She asked if there was anything she could do. Any warning? Any chance? There was not. She was given a paper to sign. She signed it with shaking hands. She was told to collect her belongings, and just like that, it was over. She walked back to her desk in a daze. A few co-workers looked up, then quickly away. Someone whispered something she could not hear. She packed her things quietly, placing them into her bag with care, as if being gentle might somehow undo what was happening. When she reached the doors, she paused. The homeless man was still outside. She could see him through the glass. For a moment, she thought about not looking at him, about walking past and disappearing into the crowd. Instead, she stepped outside. The cold hit her face. The noise of the street rushed in. He looked up when he saw her, noticing immediately that something was wrong. "They asked you to leave," he said softly. It was not a question. She nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice held no guilt, only sadness. She shook her head. "It's not your fault." She handed him the food she had packed. "Please," she said. "Take it." He accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," he said again. She turned and walked away before the tears could fall. The bus ride home felt endless. She stared at her hands, replaying the meeting over and over in her mind. Anger came and went. Confusion followed. Mostly, there was emptiness. When she reached her apartment, the silence felt loud. She sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her coat, unsure what to do next. Hours passed, her phone buzzed. Messages from coworkers. Some short, some apologetic, some afraid. Then came messages from strangers. Someone had recorded her being asked to leave. Someone had posted it online. The story was spreading. She watched the video once, then turned the phone face down. Her chest felt tight. That night, she did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling crack. Wider now, longer, as if the room itself was splitting open. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, her life had stopped, and she still did not regret what she had done. The days after she lost her job blended together in a way she had never experienced before. Time did not move in clear hours anymore. Mornings came without purpose, and nights arrived without relief. She woke up early out of habit, her body still trained to a routine that no longer existed. Each morning, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling crack, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on her chest. On the first day, she tried to act normal. She made coffee, even though there was nowhere to rush to. She sat at the small table with her cup growing cold in her hands, watching the steam disappear. She told herself she would use the time wisely. She would look for work. She would stay positive. She would not fall apart. But it was harder than she expected. Her phone buzzed often. Messages came in from people she barely knew. Some offered support. Some asked questions. A few sent harsh words, blaming her for breaking rules, telling her she should have known better. She read them all at first, then stopped. The noise became too much. The video kept spreading. Someone had filmed the moment she was escorted out of the building. It did not show everything, but it showed enough. It showed her holding her bag tightly. It showed her face, pale and stunned. It showed the homeless man sitting outside, looking up at her. People filled in the gaps with their own opinions. Some called her a hero. Some called her foolish. Others argued about policies, safety, and responsibility. Strangers debated her life as if it were a story made just for them. She did not comment. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She stayed quiet. On the second day, she went out to buy groceries. The store felt different now. Every face seemed like it might recognize her. Every whisper sounded louder than it probably was. She kept her head down, paid quickly, and left. Outside, she stood for a moment, gripping the handles of her bags. She felt exposed, like she was standing under a bright light she could not turn off. That afternoon, she sat by the window and watched the street below. People passed by, going to work, meeting friends, living their lives. She felt like she was watching from behind glass, close but separate. Her thoughts returned again and again to the man outside the building. She wondered if he was okay. She wondered if he knew how much attention had been drawn to him. She worried that she might have made his life harder instead of easier. On the third day, she could not stay inside anymore. She put on her coat and walked back toward the area near her old workplace. She told herself she was just going for a walk. She told herself she was not expecting anything. When she reached the street, her heart beat faster. The building looked the same. The glass doors still shone. People still moved in and out with purpose. The spot where the homeless man usually sat was empty. Her stomach tightened. She stood there longer than she meant to, pretending to check her phone. People brushed past her. No one stopped. No one seemed to notice the empty space. She felt a strange mix of relief and worry. Relief that he was not there to be questioned or harassed. Worried that something might have happened to him? She turned away and walked home slowly. That evening, she received an email from a local reporter asking for an interview. She deleted it. Then another came, and another. She shut her laptop and sat in the dark. She did not want to be a story. She wanted her quiet life back. As the week went on, money became a louder concern. She opened her bank app and stared at the numbers. They were not good. Rent was coming. Bills waited patiently, uncaring of kindness or principle. She updated her resume. She sent applications. Some places responded with polite rejections. Most did not respond at all. She began to doubt herself at night. She replayed the moment outside the building again and again. She wondered if she could have walked past. If she could have pretended not to see him. If her life would still be normal. But every time she reached that thought, something inside her pushed back. She remembered his voice when he said thank you. She remembered the way his hand shook slightly when he accepted the food. She remembered the calm in his eyes, and she knew she would do it again. One afternoon, there was a knock at her door. She froze. No one ever knocked on her door. She approached slowly and looked through the peephole. A woman stood outside holding a notebook and a phone. Her heart sank. She did not open the door. The woman knocked again, then slipped a card under the door. The card said she wanted to tell her side of the story. She picked it up after the footsteps faded. She stared at it for a long time before placing it face down on the table. That night, she dreamed of the building. She dreamed of the doors closing behind her. She dreamed of reaching out and finding nothing there. She woke up with tears on her face the next day. She received a message from a former coworker. It was brief but kind. It said many people inside the company were uncomfortable with how things had been handled. It said not everyone agreed. It helped a little. Still, the loneliness remained. She began volunteering at a small community kitchen a few days a week. It gave her something to do, somewhere to be. No one there treated her like a headline. They just handed her an apron and showed her where the dishes were. She liked that. She saw many people there who reminded her of the man outside the building. Quiet, tired, grateful. For small kindnesses. Each time she served a meal, she felt steadier. She still did not know what would happen next. But she was learning that even when the world speaks loudly, doing the right thing can still bring a quiet kind of peace, and somewhere beyond the noise, something unseen was beginning to move. The shift did not happen all at once. There was no loud announcement, no sudden miracle. It began quietly, in ways she almost missed. One morning, she woke up to a phone that would not stop buzzing. At first, she thought something bad had happened. Her heart raced as she grabbed it from the table beside her bed. Message after message filled the screen. Some were from unknown numbers. Some were from people she had not spoken to in years. A few were from organizations she did not recognize. She sat up slowly, confused and overwhelmed. One message stood out. It was short and careful. It said that someone wanted to speak with her not for a story, not for views, but because they believed what she did mattered. It said they understood if she said no. She put the phone down and rubbed her face. Her head felt heavy. Trust did not come easily anymore. For days, she ignored it. Instead, she focused on what she could control. She continued going to the community kitchen. She showed up early, tied her apron, washed her hands, and worked quietly. She listened to the people who came in for meals. Some talked a lot. Some said nothing at all. She learned that everyone carried something invisible. One afternoon, she was drying dishes. Someone mentioned her story. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a simple comment. You're the one from the video, right? Her chest tightened. She nodded, unsure what else to do. The person smiled gently. I'm glad you're here. That was it. No judgment. No questions. It stayed with her. Later that week, she finally replied to the message. She kept her response short. She said she was willing to listen, but she did not want anything exaggerated or untrue. The reply came quickly. They agreed. They met in a small cafe far from her old workplace. The place was quiet, warm, and smelled like fresh bread. The person across from her listened more than they spoke. They asked about her life, her work, her reasons. They did not interrupt. For the first time since everything happened, she felt seen as a person, not a headline. Days later, another message arrived. Then, another. Opportunities did not appear as gifts. They appeared as conversations. She was asked if she would consider working with an organization focused on community care. She was told they valued empathy as much as skill. They asked about her experience, not her mistake. She hesitated. Fear still lived inside her. Fear of being judged again. Fear of being let down, but something else lived there too now. A quiet confidence she did not have before. She agreed to meet. Around the same time, she heard something unexpected. The homeless man had been asking about her. She learned this through someone at the kitchen who knew him. He had been worried, they said. He had not meant for things to turn out the way they did. She felt a rush of emotion she could not name. A few days later, she saw him again. He was sitting on a bench near the park, looking thinner but still calm. When he saw her, he stood slowly. I'm glad you're okay, he said. So am I, she replied. They talked for a while. About nothing important. About weather. About the city. Before they parted, he thanked her again. Not for the food. For seeing him. She walked home feeling lighter. The job offer came soon after. It was not flashy. It did not come with a dramatic speech. But it came with respect. She accepted. And somewhere, quietly, the story began to turn. The last stage of change did not arrive with applause or sudden celebration. It arrived slowly in moments that felt ordinary while they were happening, meaningful only when she looked back. Her new job did not begin with a grand office or a title that impressed strangers. It began with a simple desk, a quiet welcome, and people who looked her in the eye when they spoke. On her first day, no one asked about the video. No one asked about the headlines. They asked how she was settling in, whether she needed help, whether she had eaten. That alone felt like a gift. She moved carefully at first, unsure of her footing. The fear of losing everything again stayed close, like a shadow that followed her from room to room. She worked hard, listened more than she spoke, and kept her head down. Old habits do not disappear easily. Over time, she noticed something different about herself. She spoke up more often. She trusted her instincts again. When she saw someone struggling, she did not turn away. The work mattered. It was not about numbers or image. It was about people, about small efforts that added up. Outside of work, life slowly stabilized. Bills were paid on time again. The nights grew quieter. Sleep came easier. The ceiling crack was still there, but it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like part of the room, something imperfect but familiar. Every so often, someone recognized her. A stranger at a bus stop. A cashier at a store. They usually smiled. Sometimes they said thank you. She accepted it politely, but she did not let it define her. She still saw the man from outside the building from time to time. He was not always in the same place anymore. Sometimes he stayed at shelters. Sometimes he disappeared for weeks. When they crossed paths, they spoke briefly, comfortably. No debt, no guilt. Life did not turn perfect. It turned real. She learned that kindness does not need permission, and that consequences do not always mean regret. The story faded from public attention, as stories do. Another headline replaced it. Another debate took its place, but something lasting remained. She carried it with her every day, and she knew now, without doubt, that one small act had shaped a life not by destroying it, but by revealing its strength. Life did not announce this chapter as something new. It slipped in quietly, the way real change often does. By the time she realized how much had shifted, she was already living differently. Her days had rhythm again. Not the old kind that came from deadlines and fear of mistakes, but a steadier one shaped by intention. She woke up early, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Morning light filled the room, soft and forgiving. She made her coffee slowly now, standing by the window. Watching the street wake up, she no longer measured her worth by job titles or approval. That took time. It came from many small moments stacked on top of each other. A conversation that mattered. A decision made without fear. A quiet sense of knowing she could survive loss and still stand. At work, she had grown into her role. People trusted her. They came to her with problems, not because she was loud or confident in the usual way, but because she listened. She asked careful questions. She remembered details. She followed through. There were days when the past still visited her. A look from a stranger. A comment overheard. A reminder of how quickly things can fall apart. When that happened, she paused, took a breath, and kept going. She understood now that kindness is not a weakness. It is a choice. Sometimes it costs something. Sometimes it gives something back in ways you never expect. The city around her felt different too. Not because it had changed, but because she had. She noticed people more. The tired faces, the small gestures. The invisible lines connecting one life to another. One evening, as she walked home, she passed a familiar spot near the building where she once worked. Someone else sat there now. Someone new, holding a cup, looking down at the ground. She slowed her steps. She reached into her bag. Not out of habit, but out of understanding. And the story continued. Time moved forward. Even when it felt like nothing else did. Seasons changed without asking her permission. The city grew warmer, then cooler again. She found herself adjusting in small ways. She barely noticed at first. She had learned how to live with the past without letting it pull her backward. It was there always, but quieter now, like a scar that no longer hurt unless touched. Some days she forgot about it completely. Other days it returned in flashes, usually when she least expected it. Her life had settled into something steady. Not perfect, not dramatic, but honest. She woke up each morning with a sense of direction. She knew where she needed to be, and more importantly, she knew why. At work, she had become someone others relied on. Not because she had all the answers, but because she cared enough to look for them. When problems came up, people sought her out. When someone felt unseen, she noticed that awareness came with weight. She felt responsibility more deeply now. She understood how small decisions could affect lives in ways no one could predict. Outside of work, she kept her world simple. Long walks, quiet evenings, occasional conversations that lasted longer than expected. She valued those moments more than she ever had before. Sometimes, when she passed crowded streets, she thought about how easy it was to miss people. How quickly someone could become invisible just by standing still. She no longer allowed herself that blindness. One afternoon, she found herself back near the building where everything had begun. She did not plan it. Her feet simply carried her there. The place looked the same, but it felt distant, like something remembered through glass. She stood across the street, watching people go in and out. Their faces familiar in the way strangers often are. Busy, focused, unaware. She felt no anger. Only a quiet understanding. What had happened there had broken her open, not apart, and because of that, she could see more clearly now. She turned away and continued walking, carrying forward a story that was no longer about loss, but about what remained by the time this part of her life began. She no longer thought of it as a story with chapters. It felt more like a long road, one that curved and changed without warning. Some days were clear, other days were heavy, but she kept walking. She had learned to slow down, to listen to herself, to notice when her body was tired, when her mind needed rest. This was not something she had been taught before. It came from losing control once and realizing she could survive it. Her mornings were quieter now. She spent more time at the window watching people pass, wondering what burdens they carried. She no longer assumed anything about strangers. Everyone had a reason for who they were. At work, she began helping train new people. She showed them patience, not pressure. She remembered how fear could shut someone down faster than failure ever could. People responded to that. They stayed. They grew. Outside of work, she started joining small community meetings. Nothing official. Just people talking about local needs, about food drives, shelters, ways to help without turning help into control. She spoke rarely. But when she did, people listened. Not because she was famous, but because she was honest. Her past followed her quietly, no longer loud enough to define her, but present enough to remind her why she chose this path. She understood now that life does not reward kindness in predictable ways. Sometimes it costs you first. Sometimes it tests how much you are willing to lose. And sometimes it gives back something deeper than comfort. She did not know where the road would lead next, but she trusted herself to walk it. This part of her life felt quieter on the surface, but inside, things were still moving. Growth did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like learning when to rest. Sometimes it looked like saying no without guilt. Sometimes it looked like choosing peace over proving a point. She had stopped checking old comments and messages long ago. The noise had faded, and with it, the need to explain herself. She knew her truth. That was enough. Her work continued to matter. Not because it fixed everything, but because it met people where they were. She saw progress in small signs. Someone showing up again after disappearing. Someone smiling for the first time in weeks. Someone trusting her with their story. She learned that healing was not a straight line. It looped and bent, and sometimes doubled back. When it did, she met it with patience instead of frustration. The city remained busy, loud and often careless. But she moved through it differently now. She slowed down when others rushed. She noticed who was missing when everyone else looked ahead. One evening, as the sun lowered and the streets softened, she paused near a familiar corner. She did not reach into her bag this time. She simply sat nearby and shared the quiet. That felt like enough. She understood now that her story was not about what she lost, but about what she chose to keep, and she carried that forward. One steady step at a time. By this point, her life no longer felt like it was recovering. It felt like it was continuing. That difference mattered more than she expected. She no longer woke up thinking about what had been taken from her. She woke up thinking about what the day might need from her. Some days, it was energy. Some days it was patience. Some days it was simply showing up. The past had settled into a quiet place inside her. It did not disappear, but it no longer demanded attention. When she thought about it, she felt calm, not angry. She understood now that moments do not define a life by themselves. It is what comes after that shapes who a person becomes. Her work had grown deeper. She was trusted with responsibility, not because she asked for it, but because people saw how she carried it. She took care with decisions. She thought about consequences. She remembered faces. Outside of work, her world stayed simple. She liked it that way. She learned how to enjoy silence without feeling lonely. She learned how to be alone without feeling empty. Sometimes she still noticed people sitting on sidewalks, standing quietly near doors, waiting to be seen. She never forgot what it felt like to be judged for noticing them. She did not change the world, but she changed how she moved through it, and that was enough. The morning began like many others now, quietly and without urgency. Light came through the window in soft lines, resting on the walls, the table, the floor. She stood by the sink holding a cup of warm water, letting the calm settle into her bones. There was a time when mornings filled her with worry before her feet even touched the ground. That time felt far away, though she knew it was not truly gone. It lived inside her as memory, not fear. She dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance. The mirror showed a face that looked steadier than it once had. Not younger, not brighter, just steadier. That mattered more. When she stepped outside, the city greeted her in its usual way. Cars moved past, people hurried along sidewalks, sounds layered on top of one another. Nothing paused for her story, and she did not expect it to. She liked that the world continued. It meant she could continue to. She walked the long way to work, as she often did. It gave her time to think, and more importantly, time to notice. She passed the small shop that opened early, the one that always smelled like bread. She passed the bus stop, where people stood with tired eyes and hopeful patience. She passed a man sitting on the ground near a wall, holding a cup and staring at nothing in particular. She slowed, not from habit, but from awareness. She no longer acted without thinking. She also no longer thought herself out of acting. She reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of fruit she had packed without knowing why. She placed it near him gently. No words were needed. He nodded once. She nodded back. She kept walking at work. The day unfolded in pieces, conversations, tasks, small decisions that mattered more than they appeared to. She listened. She responded. She helped where she could. There was no rush to prove herself anymore. Her value was already known. Later that afternoon, she was asked to sit in on a meeting. Not because she had to, but because her perspective mattered. That still surprised her sometimes. She remembered the version of herself that stayed silent, afraid of being noticed for the wrong reason. That version felt distant now, like someone she used to know, as people spoke. She paid attention not only to their words, but to what they avoided saying. She had learned that skill the hard way. When it was her turn, she spoke carefully, simply, truthfully. The room listened. When the meeting ended, she felt a familiar, quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not relief, just the sense that she had been useful. On her way home, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from someone she worked with years ago, someone who had stayed silent during the worst days. The message was short. It said they often thought about what happened. It said they wished they had spoken up. It said they were glad she was okay. She read it twice, then placed the phone back in her pocket. She did not feel anger. She did not feel the need to respond right away. Some things did not require answers. That evening, she cooked a simple meal and ate slowly. She washed the dishes and dried them by hand. She sat by the window as the sky darkened and the city lights came on one by one. Each light felt like proof that life continued in small, steady ways. As she prepared for bed, She thought briefly about the long path behind her, the loss, the fear, the moments of doubt that had almost convinced her she was wrong for caring. She knew now that caring had never been the mistake. It had been the beginning, and the story was not. Finished, she lay down and closed her eyes, breathing evenly, ready for whatever came next. By the time this stage of her life arrived, she no longer thought in terms of beginnings or endings. Everything felt connected, like one long thread that had twisted and knotted itself before finally starting to loosen. She woke early. She usually did, but this time she stayed in bed a little longer. Not out of sadness or fear, but out of awareness. She listened to the sounds of the building waking up around her. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing, water running somewhere above her. Ordinary sounds that once blended into the background now felt grounding. She got up slowly and moved through her morning without rushing. She made breakfast, something simple, and ate it while standing near the window. The city outside was already busy, people moving with purpose, each carrying their own unseen worries and hopes. She had learned that most lives were lived quietly, without witnesses, and that did not make them less meaningful. When she stepped outside, the air felt cool and clear. She walked at an easy pace, letting her thoughts come and go. There was a time when her mind raced constantly, replaying mistakes, imagining worst outcomes. That noise had softened. She still remembered everything that had happened. She always would. But memory no longer controlled her steps. As she walked, she passed familiar places. The small park, the bus stop, the corner where someone often sat asking for spare change. Some days she stopped. Some days she did not. She no longer judged herself either way. She understood that care took many forms. At work she was greeted warmly. Not with excitement, not with ceremony, but with respect. She liked that more. It meant she belonged. Her day filled with conversations and quiet tasks. She helped someone figure out a problem. She listened when another person needed to talk. She noticed when someone was struggling and offered help without making a show of it. Later, during a break, she sat alone for a moment and thought about how far she had come. Not in distance, but in understanding. She had learned that doing the right thing did not always look right to everyone, and she had learned that staying true to herself mattered more than approval. This was not the end of her story. It was simply another step forward. The days had a different weight now. Not heavy, not light, just steady. She moved through them with a sense of quiet purpose, kind that did not need attention to exist. That morning, she woke before the alarm. She stayed still for a moment, listening to her own breathing. There was comfort in knowing she was safe, that the fear that once lived in her chest no longer ruled her thoughts. She got up and made her bed carefully, smoothing the blanket with both hands. It was a small habit she had picked up during a difficult time, a way to remind herself that order could exist even when life felt uncertain. After washing her face, she stood by the mirror. The reflection looked calm, thoughtful. She did not search for flaws anymore. She looked for honesty instead. Outside, the street was already awake. She stepped into the flow of the city, feeling part of it without being overwhelmed. She noticed the same details she always did, but now they felt familiar rather than distracting. A person laughed loudly nearby. A delivery truck rumbled past. Someone argued on a phone call. Life happened all at once, and she walked through it without needing to hide. She stopped at a small stand and bought a warm drink. She thanked the person behind the counter and meant it. Gratitude had become easier with time as she continued on. She saw someone sitting alone near the sidewalk, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. She paused. Not every pause led to action, but this one did. She offered the drink she had just bought. The person looked surprised, then grateful. No long conversation followed. None was needed. She walked on, feeling neither proud nor guilty, only present. At work, the hours passed in steady rhythm. She focused on what was in front of her. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, Her words carried weight because they were measured. During a quiet moment, she thought about how far she had come, about how one small act of kindness had once turned her life upside down. She smiled softly. She would do it again, always.